Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm very pleased to welcome Paul Carter today. I'm a long-term viewer and fan of BBC Click, which is the program that Paul is a journalist on and also helps produce. It's been running 20 years and is on BBC News or BBC Worldwide if you're outside of the UK. So, and one of the reasons I like it is because it features all kinds of technology, including inclusive technologies. So welcome, Paul. It's great to have you. And you know what? We're pretty much replicating the new 2021 Click Studio here by doing this from home. So
oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm honoured to have been asked to do it. But yeah, you're right. This is it's kind of the new normal, isn't it, to be broadcasting from home?
Yes. Although I did see the sort of home broadcast kit that you had on the show the other day, which was 50 grand's worth of kit in flight cases and everything else with all the breakout lights and everything.
Well, I have to say, Spencer and Lara, the main presenters of our program, you know, they have full proper studio setups in their house. As you can see, mine's not much of a backdrop. So yeah, I drew the short straw. No fancy lights and cameras for me.
And likewise for me, you know, it is real plant. It's not plastic. But other than that, yes, absolutely. I think everybody's now doing video from home. We're getting to see the insides of people's houses, which is interesting. Some interesting ones on Newsnight, by the way. Oh my goodness, you didn't tidy up.
Do you know what? It is still a source of mystery to me that we're nearly a year into this and people still haven't worked out to not have their laptops pointing directly up their nostrils. It's slightly interesting. Put your webcams on books, people. Come on.
Yeah. So for those of our viewers that don't know, can you tell us a little bit more about Click and what you do and also sort of some of the stuff that you feature that's exciting?
Sure. I mean, I'll give you the official kind of spiel first of all, if you like. I mean, Click is the BBC's flagship technology program. As you say, we're broadcast on BBC News in the UK, BBC One on weekend mornings, and worldwide on BBC World. We've got a reach of about 300 million, and our weekly viewership is about 80 million worldwide. So it's pretty big. I tend not to tell interviewees that before we speak to them because sometimes that makes them very nervous. We also go out. You might see us sometimes on airlines. Well, not so much at the moment, but if you know, on your in-flight entertainment, cruise ships, things like that. Editorially, we cover the whole gamut of technology. I do always say to people, we're not a consumer technology program specifically. So, you know, we're not strictly about, oh, this is the best television to buy, or there's a new phone out this week. You know, we might nod toward those if they were particularly relevant or interesting, but that's not our sole kind of remit. We are first and foremost a current affairs program, so it's technology related to current affairs, and how that kind of ties in to broader themes such as artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, all of that kind of thing, and everything in between. I always like to think of Click as being about how does technology change the world. That's always the way that I would describe it to other people. And then, yeah, outside of that, we are translated into, I think at last count, 17 different languages, and it's available in over 200 countries and growing. So, yeah, and in terms of accessibility and things like that, we cover accessibility a lot. It's gone up since I became involved in the show, but I should stress that the program covered accessibility long before I came along. I produce a episode of the show every year to tie in with I always have to think about this before I say it, International Day of Persons with Disabilities. But also, I'm very keen to stress that we don't just do one show that's just about disability each year. We do disability and accessibility stuff all year round. We just happen to do one show a year, which we unashamedly devote just to that subject.
Yeah.
Spiel over.
Great. And yeah, I can back you up as a regular viewer. There's always, you know, quite frequently there are segments on things that are sort of inclusive and talking about sort of impact on humanity of tech. So I always enjoy getting a fix of people trying jetpacks and self-driving cars and all of this stuff, but also the sort of analysis of what's going on the web, and it's really eclectic, and I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy it so much, because you don't necessarily know what you're going to get from week to week.
And to be honest, it's such an incredible beat to work, because by the very nature of what we're covering, there is always something new, there's always something happening, there's always something exciting. And I think even more so nowadays, it's an area that impacts and kind of reaches into everyday lives much more than it used to before. Technology is part of all of our lives now, just in terms of everything that we do throughout the day, more so than it was 10 years ago, more so than it was 10 years before that. So yeah, it's never dull, that's for sure.
So Deborah, yes, you're coming off mute. Great.
Yeah, thank you. And welcome to the program, Paul. I have not seen Click, and so I'm definitely going to make sure that I go out and look at it, because I'm a big fan of BBC. But I also applaud BBC for bringing you in, because you obviously are very talented, but at the same point, you are also have a lived experience of disabilities. And so I love that that you are there. Just by you being there talking about these topics, you cause inclusion. So we don't see that as much in the United States, and so I see it more in the United Kingdom, and I appreciate the United Kingdom for that. And certainly BBC, we are huge fans of BBC in the United States. So many of my friends, we all prefer BBC over some of our news medias, and I won't say the names, but y'all know who they are. But I just like BBC because the richness of the content, but I also like that BBC really focus on having people that have lived experiences of different segments, because I just think that's so powerful. So I would be curious, Paul, how did you get involved? I know you said it's been 20 years, which is amazing, but how did you get involved in this? Because it's a very successful program, and obviously you're a very talented producer, but I was just wondering how it came about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but just before I get onto that, I do kind of want to caveat that just because I do tend to cover all of our accessibility and kind of disability related stuff, that's not just what I do. I cover absolutely everything on the show, as well as disability and accessibility stuff. It's not necessarily just, oh, we've got an access story, let's wheel Paul out. That's not.
Such a great point.
That's not how it goes. So that's good. But I mean, in terms of my background, I mean, I've been at the BBC on and off for sort of around 10 years. I trained as a journalist. I worked in print for a number of years for a disability publication, and then at a couple of consumer magazines, and then I moved across into television and worked at a couple of independent production companies, and joined the BBC again a few years ago to work on a program called Newsnight, which is our kind of flagship evening political news program, I guess you'd call it. And yes, I've worked in TV and in radio, and I joined Click. Just trying to think of my days now. About 3.5 years ago. So I've been on the program for about the last 3.5 years. So yeah, I've kind of had a roundabout route to get where I am, but I'm pleased where I've ended up.
And you bring up such a good point, because one thing that we see in the United States, just speaking from the lens of the US right now, we will take people with disabilities and they only can work in the disability field. And it's ridiculous, because, that we are people. So we have a lot to add. So I think I think it's great that you're talking about accessibility and disability inclusion, but I think it's even more powerful that you are not talking about that. You're talking about technology. So I think we need to continue to change the dialogue. And I think you're a perfect example of, somebody that's very talented, that anyone would be lucky to be working with. And, you did the steps, that led to this success. So kudos to you. And once again, to BBC. So thank you.
If I can come in on that, I think that actually there's, yes, the corporation does a good job. You're one of many represented in mainstream roles in front of camera. I'm also, particularly like our, Gary O'Donoghue in terms of political correspondent, mainstream role. Gary's amazing because Gary does all of his video edits and he's a JAWS user. So, Gary's fantastic, but more to the point, he's doing a mainstream, role, and it's not disability focused. So it's like you say, it's representation as part of the wider organization that's interesting. I'm also interested in the behind camera stuff because actually, it's great to have people in front of camera, but there also needs to be that opportunity to work behind camera, making the decisions, because that also impacts representation. So as a producer, what are the sort of steps being taken, or do you think are important to take to be inclusive? Because obviously, you can have obvious disabilities, but there's also lots of hidden disabilities as well. And how can we make the best of our opportunities to lead and include through some of the behind camera roles?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right, and it's a big question because there's not just one easy solution. I mean, there are several ways to tackle it. I think that whole thing about on-screen representation is a big one because I think a lot does come from that in terms of I hate to use the word kind of inspiration, and I don't mean it in the kind of the term that it's come to be laden as, but people often say to me 20 years ago, they didn't see other disabled people on television doing mainstream roles. So I do think that does have a benefit. But I think in terms of the sort of softer power, if you like, it is about getting more people involved behind the camera because, the whole ethos of nothing about us without us is especially important in television. And where I think that's most critical is actually in story selection. And it's about getting disabled people telling the stories that are important to us and to our lives and to our communities, and not the stories that non-disabled people think are important to disabled people. And that's a subtle change, but I think that's really important. And that's come to pass on the program that I work on, certainly, because people have come to me and said, hey, what do you think of this? And I would say, no, absolutely not. We're not doing that. But I always caveat it with X, Y, and Z, and that's why we shouldn't be doing that type of story or whatever. But I mean, even now, you will see stories that are out there, and I'm not just talking about the BBC. I'm talking generally, and you can tell straight away that there were no disabled people involved in the production of that content, and because that if there were, it never would have been made. And to get to that point, I think is critical. And how we do that, I mean, it's a big question. There's a lot to do around pipeline into the media for people. So that's, recruitment, training, all of that. Retention, which is the big one that's often forgotten about. It's great getting people in on schemes, but it's then about actually keeping those people within your organization and allowing them to grow and to move upwards and to actually get to those leadership positions where they can make those decisions and promotion. And and then I think also for people like me, it's enabling other people. It's building bridges behind you and throwing ladders down, if I can use those terrible cliches. I see it as my responsibility to give opportunities to other young disabled reporters to get on screen, to other producers to come and tell their stories. So there's not one magic bullet. It's fighting on a number of fronts, and it's not something that's going to change overnight. As an organization, is the BBC doing well? I think yes, absolutely. Could we do better? 100%.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I was lucky enough to be able to take a course sponsored by the BBC and the Media Trust, which was looking at giving media skills to disabled people to be expert interviewees. So I think that's another element where quite often, we'll have the same talking heads brought onto the news programs all the time, and actually there's less of a diversity in guests. And I think that that initiative was also really interesting because, you know, and it's not just BBC, all news programs end up wheeling out the same commentators all of the time. So I think that this was a really nice initiative where it was training people in academia or who have some kind of expertise, how to deal with interviews, how to look at the camera, sit still, which I'm failing to do right now. It's harder with a webcam, it has to be said.
Yeah.
And actually, that leads on to my next question, which is actually, how has broadcasting adjusted in times of COVID? And we've already talked a little bit about doing it from home, but how difficult is it now to produce programs when everyone is distributed?
Yeah, it was something that we basically learnt on the job. When the kind of the original lockdown hit, here in the UK in March last year, no one really from the channel came to us and said, you're coming off air. So we basically took the decision among ourselves that we're going to do, the best we can do. And we knew that obviously it was going to change the way we work. And to be honest with you, there was no magic master plan. We just kind of rolled with it and saw what worked and what didn't work, and kind of tweaked little bits as and when we went. And I think in those early days we did have to do things very, very differently because we weren't able to get out and film anything at all, which was kind of a culture shock for us because as I've said before, we're a global program. We travel all over the world to film our content. And then suddenly to not only not be able to leave the country, but to not be able to leave your own home was a bit of a reversal for us in how we did things. So it was basically making use of the best of what we had. So platforms like Zoom to interview our guests, using a lot of creative kind of tricks and tools that we had, maybe getting people to film stuff remotely for us on their phones or whatever, just anything we could do to try and break up the kind of monotony of it just being people talking on Zoom. I like to think we did pretty well at it. It seemed to go down pretty well. Obviously can't wait to actually get back out and be doing stuff in person again. But yeah, it's been a challenge for everyone. Everyone has had to learn to do everything differently, and we're no different to that. I'm certainly not complaining. We just had to get on with it. And I think we've done okay. We were lucky enough that when things opened up a little bit for the halcyon days of summer, we were able to get out and do some stuff in the flesh again and sort of fill the shelves with some content. So we weren't completely back to square one. So yeah, it's I'd say even now, 9 months in, we're still learning, we're still tweaking it, we're still trying new things. But if anything, it's kind of given us a bit more. I mean, I certainly wouldn't go as far as to say it's been a blessing or anything like that, but it is kind of, to a degree, has given you a little bit of creative freedom, because it's been like, okay, well, we'll try this, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's it's been a challenge, but we're tackling it, I guess.
Paul, along that same line, what do you think you're going to keep from what you learned about COVID-19, from the lessons you learned with COVID-19? What do you think that y'all think, oh, well, it works much better now this way? I mean, were there any real valuable lessons learned? And once again, I know that's still unfolding, but.
I mean, I think on a sort of wider perspective, obviously the whole nature of working remotely, it's something that, if you'd have asked us a year ago whether we could make 9 months worth of content without seeing each other, I'd have thought, I would have laughed at you. And we've been doing that for 9 months. And so I absolutely think there will be elements of that we take forward, that it's going to reduce things like, and this doesn't just apply to us or to the television. I think this applies to everybody. I think the whole concept of presenteeism and things like that will definitely reduce because of this. And that has big plays as well into access issues, by the way. But in terms of us specifically, I think that the whole notion that we don't necessarily have to be on the other side of the planet to see stuff or to bring stuff to life on screen is interesting, and probably something that I would say that it's probably going to raise the bar slightly for us in terms of having to travel and go and do things. Obviously, we still will do that, but I think perhaps we might think about doing that a little bit harder than we perhaps would have done before.
And so obviously that has a positive sustainability impact because your carbon footprint is going to be somewhat less. But what do you think that this will have an impact also on sort of studios and longer term as well? You know, will it give, you know, for example, you know, you mentioned in terms of you know, access implications already. Do you think it will open up opportunities for journalists more with disabilities where they maybe have mobility issues that would have been maybe the expectations were you have to travel everywhere in order to report, for example? Do you think that there'll be that impact? And do you think also the fact that we've got used to citizen journalism and like slightly untidy and unkempt backgrounds and everything else change our expectations for and need for studios and stuff like that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I hope so. I absolutely hope that's what happens. I've been in the game long enough that I'm not going to sit here and say yes, we're never going to go back to the way we used to make things 18 months ago, because you know who knows how the world works. I really hope so, and I think it's everyone's responsibility to take the good things that have come out of this, what few good things there may be, but to take those and to take those forward. I think, you know, one of the interesting things you mentioned there about the whole concept of people are much more forgiving about dodgy backgrounds and all of that. I do think that's a really interesting point, and that's something that we learn very quickly in this, isn't that if you can, you know, understand what someone is saying, and you can get the gist of what's coming across, people aren't that bothered about what it looks like. One of the really interesting things that we learned quite early on in recording Zoom interviews, this might be a boring thing for people who don't work in TV, but we actually got the people we were interviewing to record their sound on their mobile phone or any device that they had locally to them at the same time as doing the Zoom interview, and then sent us the audio file afterwards, because we realized pretty early on, you know, if people's internet drops or whatever and the picture goes blocky, that doesn't really matter as long as you can still understand what that person's saying. And it's just little things like that again, you know, we probably wouldn't have even considered. So yeah, in terms of the whole thing about studios and will it improve access for disabled people getting on the air, I really hope so. And hopefully those days of, oh, you know, well, if you can't get into a ISDN point, we can't have you on the air, hopefully those days are gone. But like I say, I think it's going to be very easy. I think what will be surprising will be how quickly all of this is forgotten once things get back to normal. I know normal may seem a long way off now, but and I think it's everyone's responsibility, particularly when it comes to things like access, to remember that things have been possible now that we wouldn't have thought were possible 18 months ago.
Well, one of we have guests in the past, and we have discussed about the representation of people with disabilities within media. Okay, and even if we look today across, you know, all the different newsrooms around Europe, programs and shows, you know, it's not really flattering in terms of what we see in terms of you know.
I'm sorry, I'm really struggling to hear you.
Can you hear me?
That's better. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
You're breaking. Yeah, that is better.
Okay. So we had guests in the past where we discussed about representation in media. Okay. And what do you think we need to do in order to have more to have people more visible? Because If we look around Europe to different media outlets, uh, there's still a lot to do. People are still are not really represented as they should. So how can we progress faster?
I think it's an interesting question. It's a two-sided thing, right? You've got to, first of all, the first big challenge is you've got to convince these organizations that are responsible for increasing that representation. You've got to make them think that it's a cause, not a cause, that's not the right word, but it's something that they should be doing, right? That's the big organizational, institutional challenge. You have to show broadcasters why it's important to them to be putting disabled people on screen, right? That's the first challenge. They've got to realize that there is a business case and that they should be representing their audiences. And then I think the second point flows from that, and it kind of goes back to the whole issue of having people on screen that then shows other people that this is a career for me. This is something that I can do, and providing opportunities for those people to have roots in to that industry. I think the media has got very good, certainly in the UK, at running schemes and apprenticeship programs and recruitment drives around increasing disability representation. There's a long way to go on moving beyond that, because I think we've done a very good job at getting people in on the ground floor. And excuse me, as I mentioned, where you take that with retention and promotion and things like that, that's the next stage beyond that. But I think for countries, broadcasters, other areas of industries that aren't at that level yet, you need to make those people with the decision-making powers realize that this is something that they absolutely have to be doing. That's a bigger challenge, but I think there are lots and lots of moves afoot to kind of show that there is a business case out there for increasing representation and increasing accessibility. And if I can make one third point from that, that link between representation and accessibility is really important as well, because it's no good having a desire to bring more disabled people into your industry if your industry isn't accessible to them.
Yeah, I think that those are really good points, because you can't do these things one thing at a time. There has to be this sort of interwoven approach, because accessibility is the enabler for people to be able to perform at the level of their potential. So it's great that you give someone a job, but if they can't then do that job, then they're going to fail, and that's going to have implications. So the technology as the enabler, as well as the policies and the recruitment and everything else, is the thing that will help people progress. Thinking about technology, because Click is about technology, what are the technologies that are really exciting you right now, generally, and then also in terms of with potential to include people?
I mean, obviously the big stuff around is everything around artificial intelligence. It's a bit of a hill that I will die on at the moment, that everyone is calling everything AI when it isn't AI. That drives me absolutely bonkers. But I think true AI has lots of access implications and possibilities, and a lot of the big tech companies are cottoning onto that. Microsoft, for example, have got an AI for accessibility grants program, and they're funding a lot of businesses that are looking to use artificial intelligence in accessibility applications. I featured one of their grant recipients in our last accessibility special, and it's using AI for object recognition for blind and visually impaired people, because there are lots of data sets out there at the moment for object recognition. Object recognition isn't new, but there are very little data sets that exist out there for objects that are of specific use to blind and visually impaired people. And so Microsoft are funding a research project to try and to build up those kind of databases. And that's just one example. There are dozens out there. So I think AI has huge implications. The other interesting thing, and I mention this as both a kind of real positive thing, but also kind of a negative, is VR. I think virtual reality and augmented reality as well have huge potential on one hand for accessibility and for disabled people, but at the same time, they are throwing up a huge number of issues around accessibility. I've got an Oculus Quest headset. I can't use the controllers because I don't have hands, and they are very, very specifically designed for hands because they fit around your wrist and you use your fingers to press the buttons. It has hand tracking built in, so you don't have to use the controllers. Obviously, hand tracking doesn't work for me. So therefore, a lot of the programs and the software that runs on that platform is designed to be used specifically with those controllers, so I can't use it. So that's a kind of a real conundrum, and in a way, it's part of the accessibility and inclusive tech kind of debate, if you like, that I absolutely love, because with all of these great new developments and progress we make in one area, it throws up a whole host of accessibility issues on the other hand, and it's fascinating to me, and where we will go with that is, you know, who knows. I'm looking at a project at the minute that is quite close to me, that it's a group of researchers are looking at hand tracking and input for devices for people that don't have hands or might have paralysis. So that kind of stuff is really interesting. I think the next kind of great battlefront of accessibility is going to be around UX. I think that's going to be a really interesting area. So those are the two sort of big things I'm really interested in. The other thing that everyone really talks about is obviously driverless cars. I'm an autonomous vehicle skeptic. I think a lot of the industry is built on hype. But again, it's kind of a bit of a unicorn for disabled people, right? Because if they were to become a reality tomorrow, how brilliant would that be for disabled people everywhere, that they could get in a car outside and take it to where they want to go. But I think we're miles off that yet, despite what the autonomous lobby will tell you. They're all going to be banging down my door now to have a go at me. But yeah, those are kind of the three big areas for me. But there are lots of other interesting things bubbling under as well.
I think that's excellent, and you're right about the challenges of new technologies, you know, throwing up new accessibility questions, and that's one of the exciting things about working in the field, is that you get to again explore new things and solve new problems again. So thank you very much. We've reached the end of our allotted time. Need to thank our friends and supporters, Barclays Access, MyClearText and Microlink, for helping keep us going after all this time, and really look forward to you joining us on Twitter.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.